Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm Connor Rebush. As always, that's Phil McKenzie. Should we start doing a thing, Phil, where you sort of chip in? You say, like, that's me. Right at the top.
That's what I think of that idea, Connor.
Right.
That's what I think of it, you son of a bitch.
Dead Air McKenzie coming in
for
hot.
A perky little intro. That's what you get. Icy cold dead air.
Coming in hot, Phil Dead Air McKenzie. And fortunately, that's not my only co-host today. Thank God. We're very lucky to be joined by the Fight Site's Miguel Class, who I'm sure you have seen. And if you haven't, you're missing out all of his wonderful striking breakdowns, video, text, apparently exclusive commentary stuff for the Fight Site Patreon. Miguel, how you doing?
Doing all right. Yeah, I think I'm just here because maybe this is like the Fight Site rite of passage or something, it seems like.
Yeah, this is how you get fired. You sort of...
Yeah, I don't know, though, because you guys are the first ones to invite me on a podcast. They haven't even had me on one of theirs yet, so maybe my loyalty is actually here with you guys.
I think what it probably, that first of all, that's awesome. I'm really, as you know, it's a mission of ours to just undermine the whole operation. But I think it may in fact be, just based on the short conversation we've had here and a few interactions online, that you're not cynical enough to be on their podcasts.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Maybe I'm just not hipstery enough and maybe not burned out enough to the point where I hate everything yet.
Yeah, like, are you capable of complaining about, say, like a Charles Oliveira fight? Because if not, you aren't enough of a bummer to.
Oh, definitely not.
Well, good. That's why we're having you on.
Yeah, exactly. Because I can imagine the types of things that would be said even about some of the fights on this card by some of our more critical people from the fight side. Although, you know, we got people like Ben Cohn and stuff. We've got nice people.
Ben is a cheerful soul. Dan was a wonderful guy we had on a week or two ago. And yes, there have been people complaining about even this card. Like, there's only 2 good fights. That is not true. UFC 281 is what's on the docket today, and it is a fantastic card. Before we dive into it, Miguel, I'll let you cover the details, actually. You wanted to make sure that we shouted this out, and we may as well do it right at the top. Tell people what they should do to help out one of your coworkers.
Yeah, so I think we talked about it before. I think Dan mentioned it, but our good friend Tumen is currently in the process of trying to flee Russia, and he's been going through a bunch of very expensive immigration stuff. So we have a Ko-fi page set up, kofi.com/IggyTFS. That's IGGYTFS. And so you can go there, and if you have just a few spare bucks, send it his way. He's kind of got a lot of the funding for at least sort of the legal process, but still needs to like buy plane tickets, things like that. It's obviously just, there's never going to be enough money. It's a gigantic project to move to another country, and it's very expensive. So anything you guys can do to help him out would be awesome.
Yeah, please go check that out. All right. So we may as well at this point dive right in to the card we have to discuss. Again, it's UFC 281. Anyone who tells you it's not a good card truly just does not have any love in their heart for the sport anymore. That's basically what it is. Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. Is it a normal title fight? No. Would, under different circumstances, Alex Pereira deserve to get this shot? No. Doesn't matter. It's got a story. It's interesting. It'll be exciting to watch, hopefully. And certainly as part of the Israel Adesanya psychological profile, I'm very, very curious to hear your guys' thoughts on it. We've also got in the co-main event, Carla Esparza, the undisputed women's strawweight champion. On the
times.
Well, that's right, 2-time champion. How's this title defense going to work out? Better than the last one? Probably not, but we're going to talk about it. Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler is also on the main card. And then I think for our last main card fight discussion, we're going to dip down to the featured prelim, Brad Riddell versus Renato Moicano. And then you got to know, Phil and I will be sticking around and discussing the myriad other less relevant but interesting and likely entertaining matchups that are littered across this undercard. So, without any further ado, let's get into the main event. Adesanya, Pereira. Of course, everyone knows at this point that these guys have a history. They fought twice in kickboxing. First time, Pereira wins a close decision. Second time, Adesanya mostly beats Pereira up, actually gives him a standing 8 count, somehow gets knocked out in the third round. I think, personally, you can look at the matchup between these men as a sort of a benchmark for like what kind of fighter Israel Adesanya is. What are the things he's worried about happening to him in the cage? Does it make it an unwinnable matchup? No. I've been sort of thinking of Jędrzejczyk versus Shevchenko a lot, and how that was another matchup that somehow across sports, across many years, retained its like essential stylistic nature, even in the UFC. I wonder if that'll be the case here. Phil and I, Miguel, as I'm sure you know, often theorize that style matchups just don't change over the years. No matter how much seems to have changed between the fighters, they often don't change at all as much as you expect them to. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how the dynamic between these men may or may not have shifted now that they are both technically MMA fighters. So, Miguel, why don't you lead us in? What are your sort of opening thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of tried to ask myself, like, would I still be excited about this fight if they hadn't fought in kickboxing, number one? And number two, does it even matter? Because I do think that the psychological component of it actually matters a lot. And I think a lot of analysts, types, they kind of get drawn to the more technical, tactical things and then kind of overlook a lot of the circumstantial things and just kind of mental aspects of fights that often, actually probably more than we even realize, are the things that really determine what it actually happens in a fight. So I'm super interested in this because I think that obviously the kickboxing fights mean a lot, but kickboxing is incredibly different than MMA, and not just because there's wrestling involved and takedowns. Like, it's the small gloves that changes things like defense and hand fighting. It should make it easier to get a KO. There's with smaller gloves. You know, there's the cage versus the ring. There's 3-minute rounds versus 5-minute rounds. The clinch dynamic is totally different because obviously you can just fight it out in the clinch. Nobody's going to tell you to stop, and you can actually grab people's wrists and you can grab their biceps and their triceps and hold them there and control people in the clinch. There's a difference in the range that the fight is fought at. You're not just conceding to fight like this kickboxing range. And then there's like all these other intangibles. Like MMA is just like way more popular. There's a lot more attention and more media and all this stuff that comes with fight week and people online and stuff like that, where, you know, like if you look at some of the fights between them and kickboxing, or even like Pereira's more recent fights, it just feels like there's like nobody watching, even in you know, inside the arenas. So I think it does change a lot, but then who they are as fighters, I think in a sense they are different as fighters, but in some senses, maybe, I don't know how you feel about this, but do you feel like they've kind of, both of them kind of gone into their like more base psychological tendencies than even they were in kickboxing? So over time, maybe they've gotten better and more refined, but just become more of themselves.
I think so. I mean, I think that does tend to happen. Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at them, I mean, they're just more pared down fighters. And that might be, I think, partially due to the influence of MMA and going into the, you know, moving into the sport, is that they've just removed tools in order to keep what was the most effective. You know, me and Connor have historically talked a lot about how Joanna Jędrzejczyk did that when she first came over, right? It took her a long time to like bring her full kicking game kind of back into her MMA approach, because you know, you got the impression she was prioritizing takedown defense and stuff like that. But yeah, but also that is just something that tends to happen to people as they get older. And both of these guys are now, you know, they're probably uh, late prime at best kind of thing. They're definitely mature adult fighters. That is what you would expect. So yeah, I totally sign off on that. I think I mean, because that's one of the things when you look at their older fights is the sort of pace and diversity on display is something which we haven't seen from Izzy for a while in MMA. And yeah, I think we see. I think Era has also just become just a bit slower paced, a bit more cautious. And I don't know whether that's the result of the different sport or or just the fact that he's just becoming, as Miguel said, more of himself over time.
Yeah, I think he's always been quite a patient fighter, and yeah, I agree with both of you that people tend to your various neuroses just tend to kind of grow as you get older, and if competition in general is like the realm of head cases, psychology is so important in any competition. MMA is especially full of head cases because there's just intense pressure and so many threats to worry about, and much more, just many more stimuli, like forcing you to react as who you are, rather than getting to think and alter your style freely. You're being punished when you do that, and it doesn't work out. There are a lot of pressures driving you into being yourself, and so yeah, I think MMA, even if anything, intensifies what is already a pretty natural process of aging and maturing. So I'll say that I've been feeling for months, without really looking at it too closely, that I'm going to pick Pereira, and I think I'm just going to do it. Even though I've sort of kind of already talked myself out of it. But if anything, will hopefully lead to some interesting dissenting opinions and give us a fuller picture if I try to look at this from the perspective of why won't Pereira just win this again? And to kick that off, I think we should ask the question that so many MMA fans are asking. Is Israel Adesanya going to do MMA? Is he going to wrestle? Would it be a good idea for him to wrestle? Because it's already, right, like a psychologically fraught dynamic for him. We know he's got some issues mustering the confidence to step in against serious punchers and also people his size, and that is an important factor here, is that Pereira is a big dude. So it's already psychologically fraught, but I gotta think, if he comes in here thinking he's gonna out-wrestle Pereira, and it doesn't work, he is going to be more ripe than he would be otherwise for some kind of horrible KO, because that sounds like a good way to shatter your confidence, unless you have really, really knuckled down and focused on just integrating that into a game, into a larger game plan. So, Miguel, what do you think? Is Adesanya going to wrestle?
I think it's kind of a funny thing, because I think people tend to just be like, well, he can wrestle him. He's been doing MMA for longer. But I don't really think Adesanya is going to come in, as you say, and try and do MMA. But MMA might happen. That tends to just it gets weird in fights all the time.
Yeah.
And you don't really expect it. And they're going to fall into the clinch a lot. People are going to get underhooks. They're going to move each other around and feel the strength. They might just catch a kick and follow them to the ground. There's lots of things that can happen. So, and I think in those sort of situations, yeah, I trust Adesanya to kind of have the better reactions and be used to the transitional offense and the opportunities that are available there. And yeah, there's some chance maybe he just, finds himself in a good position to take the back, and he feels like he's got an advantage there and he goes for it. Or maybe a club and sub type thing, he's not just gonna there's not gonna be a standing 8 count in their second fight, and maybe he just follows him and finishes him in that way. But I think if he's going to sort of do MMA in any way, it might be sort of in the striking aspects of it, the unique kind of things that you have because of the small gloves, like the hand fighting and the clinching. Maybe that's where he sees that there could be a bit of an advantage, even if it's just defensively. I'm going to be all the way out, and then I'm going to enter the clinch proactively when Pereira comes in, and I'm just going to tie him up, and then I'm going to, push off and get away again.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think the clinch might be, if anything is different about this style dynamic in MMA, I think the clinch might be it. Because Adesanya had a lot of success in the clinches against Pereira in the kickboxing fights. And, of course, those clinches, it's not Muay Thai. Those clinches get broken quickly. Anytime, like, the action sort of ceases and knees stop landing, the referee steps in and separates the fighters. And obviously that just doesn't happen in MMA. You very rarely get clinch breaks of any kind unless there's a huge amount of stalling. And even that could very likely be a win for Adesanya to just bank time, chipping away, controlling Pereira. I think, if anything, if we see any wrestling, as in like shot takedowns, the right approach for Adesanya would not be to bank on getting those takedowns, but to use that as an MMA fighter's way into a protracted clinch fight, where I do think that is one area where he has a real technical edge over Pereira. Otherwise, at range, I mean, this is the strange thing about their matchups is you look at Adesanya, you get the impression he's the slick one. I think, really objectively, he's not actually that much better a defensive fighter than Pereira. Like, his best moments in their kickboxing fights were not when he was trying to out-slick Pereira on the back foot. He's more offensively overwhelming than Pereira. More difficult combinations to deal with, more layers. And that was when he was, especially in the rematch, when he was dominating Pereira. It's because he essentially spent that whole fight doing what it took him 2 rounds to work up the nerve to do in their first fight. And in their first fight, he was all over Pereira in the 3rd round and was just that's the clearest round of that entire fight. So that's the question. Pressuring Pereira, staying in his face, having the clinch as an option, this seems like the way to bank rounds and possibly to knock him out. I mean, there was a standing 8 count in that second fight before Pereira came back. Those also don't exist in MMA. That's probably a finish if he winds up in a similar situation. So that seems like a good approach. But it also means spending time in Pereira's range, giving him opportunities to surprise you with a sneaky left hook or an uppercut or a short right hand or whatever. And I think that sort of is the heart of the Israel Adesanya psychology. That, is it worth stepping into the fire to shut this guy out and break him down? If he doesn't do that, I think spending lots of time at range with Pereira, who is a very patient and himself quite a sharp fighter and an effective kicker, could be way more dangerous than staying in his face. But obviously, there's as he found out, there's dangers in that as well.
So, I think it's worth going back and looking at these guys and thinking of, like, why did people think Israel Adesanya was going to be good at MMA anyway? And why did, like, people think Alex Pereira was not a particularly strong... Pereira's been doing MMA for about the same amount of time as Adesanya, unless I'm mistaken. Or he's been doing it for quite a long time anyway.
Yeah,
but
spread out. But
I think so. There's a few things. There is how lackadaisical he is in the clinch, and that was in his early MMA fights. It's still, we haven't seen it much in his UFC tenure, but he's still not great in there. But, like, even more damningly, I think, because you can certainly say that he was a better fighter at the end of his kickboxing career than he was even when he fought Adesanya in many ways. But
yeah.
Like, his last kickboxing match against what's his face, Russian guy, Artem Vakitov, yeah. So much of that was Vakitov just, like, taking hay off clinch breaks, entering into the clinch as a safety zone, and Pereira just sort of gave up fighting it in any real way.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I think it's a big deal that, like, yeah, Adesanya was naturally a very good clinch striker. He was used to manipulating and moving people around. I'm not sure if I think Pereira particularly is. I'm willing to be convinced otherwise, even in kickboxing. Like, secondarily, I think Pereira's defense is built for kickboxing, like, because a lot of his stuff is, we've seen people make high guards work in MMA. That is still basically a lot of his defense.
Yeah.
I think that's in part why Adesanya had to pour it on to make it work against him, like, to a significant degree, in their second fights, because in their the second fight and the end of the first, because like with any high guard, you have to manipulate it, and in order to pull it open. So he had to, like, pour in offense. I think that is simply going to be easier with small gloves.
Yeah.
And yeah, Adesanya's defense is largely predicated on not being there. He's not actually dependent on a high guard at all. I mean, he's in many ways could argue that he should be more.
He could benefit
should use
from
a high guard more, and I'm sure Joe Rogan would. So I mean, that's why he looks like the slickster. I mean, because he's just evading stuff, and I think again that what's the risk of getting knocked out by is still there, and perhaps maybe slightly higher. I think it's a defensive style that lends itself to MMA much better.
Yeah.
And lastly, I think it's the question of, like, and once you start, and, like, for me, once I add these things together, I'm like, he's got the clinch as more of a safety zone because he has more of an open, there's more of an open rule set than he's ever had against Pereira before. Just more things allowed in the clinch. But more of a clinch to the safety zone. He can land strikes more easily due to the smaller gloves. And also, if he wants to be sort of neutralizing, Izzy, who wants space and who wants to just, like, space out. A, it will be easier to do that because he can land his jab more easily. And B, he'll just have, and I think Miguel was kind of alluding to this earlier, he'll just have tons of room to move around in because he's in a giant circle as opposed to a tiny square.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of add that aspect of it to your list there, because I think cagecraft, footwork, Adesanya has, like, a massive advantage there. And that's part of the reason why, if I was looking at them crossing over into MMA, I would say that's the guy who is going to do better, because MMA just kind of, it naturally dictates that you're going to have to use range a lot to insulate yourself and to be your defense, because there's just a crazy number of possible offensive things that you have to worry about, including takedowns. And especially somebody that hasn't been a lifelong wrestler or whatever, you just having that range and being able to move around in the cage, not get stuck against the fence, that is all, like, a huge deal. And I just don't really see Pereira having that much at all. Like, I think he's very lackadaisical with his footwork and his cage positioning. And he was with the ring too, like Vakitov, Adesanya, both of them really could just get him in the corner, get him on the ropes. They could move around him. Part of the reason why, as I think Connor said earlier, that Adesanya was tearing him up close and in the clinch is because he could just move around him, because Pereira would just kind of put up his guard and and kind of push away. I mean, both of them will frame away a lot and just turn away, but Pereira is, like, kind of horrible at it, and that just Adesanya could just kind of move around him, new angle, kind of survey the guard and find a new spot to land.
In their first fight, Pereira spins around, not throwing a spinning back fist, spins around because Adesanya has cut an angle on him like 7 times. It happens a lot. Yeah. So I'll be the resident Pereira picker and just suggest some things that might poke holes in that approach for Adesanya. First of all, staying at range, navigating the space, using the range first and foremost as his primary method of defense. Pereira is a big, tall man who kicks and can defend kicks. This is something that worries Israel Adesanya most of the time. It gave him trouble against Jan Blachowicz, just like against Pereira. His best moments in that fight were when he was just straight up overwhelming Jan, backing him up to the fence and just making him deal with layer upon layer upon layer, these deep combinations. When he was at range, Jan was capable of using a jab. He was capable of checking and returning kicks, and he was capable of countering when Adesanya had to step in from that far away. And I think Pereira more or less matches up with those elements of that dynamic. I think at the very least, if Adesanya is trying to use space that much, it'll be a close fight, as most of those fights have been for Israel in MMA. The other thing is, I just want to justify a previous statement. When I say that Adesanya is not really that much slicker than Pereira defensively, the footwork is an obvious exception. I mean, he moves better. He circles better. He's lighter on his feet. And he can maintain that lightness on his feet longer as well, because Pereira will, bounce around and circle and evade. He did it against Sean Strickland. Obviously not a great parallel for this. He did it at times against Adesanya in the first round of their first fight. But I think he either gets tired or just kind of forgets to do it after a while, because he is a planted power puncher who's patient and will wait for you to meet him in the pocket. But in the pocket, Adesanya is not really, not to go full Joe Rogan here. You wouldn't teach somebody to defend like that. A lot of leaning, a lot of swatting, as Phil said, nothing really resembling a guard. And, we know he can be susceptible to left hooks. He could be susceptible to all manner of combinations, because too frequently when he has ended up in mutual punching distance, his first defensive move puts him in an awkward position. Now, he's still capable of landing some, as we know, some really tricky shots from those awkward positions, but they are awkward positions where if he gets caught, he's much more likely to get hurt because he is compromising his balance. And so, I think if Adesanya tries to be evasive here, it's going to be close, and it might be just psychologically harder for him to deal with the fact that Pereira is going to build pressure and is going to try to force the pocket on him. He's got to have a good prepared answer to that. I think it should be the clinch. Really. I think he should just step in and just grab Pereira behind the neck and take the space away from him whenever he gets close enough to exchange. But a lot of my trepidation about this matchup is really just, how does Israel Adesanya feel about facing a guy who is his size and a much heavier-handed fighter?
Let's be realistic. Alex Pereira is quite a lot bigger than Israel Adesanya.
Sure, yeah.
Huge.
He's ridiculously enormous. That was another thing that jumped out, going back to watch the kickboxing fights, is that you were like, and Pereira moved up a weight class to fight Artem Vakitov, and you're like, what? He's like a foot taller than him.
Yeah.
He's he used to be a weight class below this. But yeah, he's absolutely gigantic. Izzy is tall and skinny, whereas Pereira is just frighteningly enormous.
Yeah. So I still think the best way for Adesanya to approach this would be to just do what he did in the rematch with Pereira and just try to overwhelm him and use the advantage of that comfort with the MMA gloves, the superior hand fighting, clinch fighting. Just give him too much to compute and not enough time to figure out where his counters are. Again, if he gets in that standing 8-count position again, it's done. He's getting knocked out. Adesanya was not as powerful as Pereira, but he's a very sharp fighter, sharp puncher, and really overwhelming to deal with when he is on his roll. And again, my hesitation about actually picking him is in not really trusting that he will take that approach.
I don't think at all he's going to do that. just based off of his recent fights and
Yeah.
what happened, like in the Jan Blachowicz fight and stuff. And I even saw, I think a clip somebody posted on Twitter where Adesanya said, I think I might just jab and low kick him. And I'm like, that's exactly what he's going to do. I think that's what he thinks he needs to do to be safe. But
Yeah.
I think in a sense, you're kind of putting yourself in this situation where, like, what happens if you fall into the pocket too far with your jab? Or
Right.
what happens if, you just, he catches one of your kicks and counters you, or, blocks a kick and knocks you off balance, comes into range, and or you're trying to lean back and he just starts dinging you to the body or something. It really might look like one of these fights where it's big moments versus like minutes.
Yeah.
And those big moments for Pereira are going to be probably like really huge moments, right?
Right. And the problem with that is, for Adesanya, is like by accepting that, by relying on that as your game plan, you sort of put yourself in this like mind trap where when the pocket does happen, now you're thinking, this is the thing I wasn't supposed to let happen. This is bad. Things are going wrong. Even though he's perfectly capable of doing just as much damage as Pereira in slightly different ways in that range, if he thinks he has to just evade, yeah, your Pereira is bound to find some big moments, and may in fact be capable of racking up some points in his own right, because he's going to have a slightly easier time kicking moving forward, and he also has a jab and he has huge reach. I think it's a dicey approach against a guy like this. You're essentially the other thing, which I talk about all the time. You're agreeing to let a massive puncher spend a long time in the cage with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's often a really bad idea, strategically speaking. Like, he's capable of getting Pereira out of there. He's proven that already. What if he doesn't? I don't know. So, anything more to add? I'm still picking Pereira. I don't fully believe in it, but I certainly don't fully believe in Israel Adesanya, especially based on these recent performances.
I think based on the psychology thing, I think he has been saying all the right things, I think, because whenever a Pereira has been mentioned or brought up, he's been kind of supremely relaxed. He does not sound bothered at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't. He sounds like the two fights are not in his head at all. On the other hand, he also sounded extremely relaxed before he fought Yoel Romero, and then looked absolutely petrified in the cage.
Yes.
So he may just be very good at hiding these things.
Yeah.
I have little to offer on that front. Like, as I said, he was like, I don't know why everyone's scared of Yoel Romero, and then he got into the cage and just paralyzed for much.
Was the most scared man Yoel had ever fought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just in terms of the, do dynamics exist all the time? I think when we look at it, the obvious difference between this and, say, Shevchenko, Joanna is, as Miguel said, like, the dynamic that we can predict for this fight is minutes for Izzy and moments for Alex, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of the dynamic of their fights that we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between that and like Shevchenko versus Ian Jacek was that like Shevchenko just won everything that they ever did. Like,
yeah,
it was looked back and it was just like, man, one of these girls is just getting horsed around.
Yeah, and she also had in their previous matchups, she had the clinch advantage and has the MMA style to expand on that advantage and do even more with it in this sport than she could in kickboxing. The clinch advantage is definitely Izzy's. So if it's less of a style matchup thing, or if it's even just slightly a technical thing, if that is enough of an edge, I really think the clinch is a super important part of this fight. So
I think, but I mean, looking back at what their dynamic is, I mean, me, it just looks like, even in the kickboxing, it looks to me like a fight that Izzy wins most of the time. And sure, he has lost it twice.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I didn't really think Alex won that first fight.
No, it's very close.
I mean, I didn't even think it was that close. I didn't think it was a particularly good decision. I've got to be honest.
Fair enough.
Um,
It's the first round is somewhat clear for Pereira, just because not much happens. Third round is extremely obviously Adesanya's, and then the second round, I would tend to agree, is probably should go to Adesanya.
Yeah. So, and other than that, and he was kind of fucking Pereira up in their third fight before.
Yeah.
He did that that right hand that got him sparked.
Yeah.
Or shift or whatever exactly it was. So it just looks like over their two fights, despite the fact that Izzy has lost both of them on paper, it's a lot of Izzy It's a lot of Izzy minutes and not that many Pereira moments. And said, I think most of the this I guess goes back to Miguel's point at the beginning, is that most of the technical dynamics generated by MMA, be they the clinch or the small gloves or the big cage, just indicate like the dial should be shifted more in the favor of Adesanya.
Yeah.
Or even just, the fact that you can convert knockdowns or just weird stuff happening. I mean, both these guys wheel kick a fair bit, and both of them have fallen over doing so.
God, how funny would it be if Izzy just falls on his ass and Pereira KOs him with ground and pound? That would be absurd.
Oh, man.
Could happen.
Pereira loves his jumping knees too, right? Like, it's very possible he just jumps and Izzy just kind of, takes him down or something off of a missed flying knee.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They just get bundled over and they end up on the ground. Like, weird shit happens in MMA. It's one of its trademarks. So I think every part of the dynamic shifts it towards the technical dynamic shifts it towards Adesanya. I think it's simply the mental dynamic at this point, because it's the fact that Adesanya has had more and more negative performances when it would seem to be in his interests for them not to be negative. Academy, the incredibly close and utterly dreadful Romero fight. Like, you find yourself wondering, is this a stylistic decision or something you literally can't turn off anymore?
Yeah.
Are you just starting to get into danger because you're being so conservative?
Yeah.
I think that's not in that. I don't think that's enough for me. I think this time, and also, I can't really think of that many fights. The other thing, like looking back at these guys, the fights between these guys, is that they were great.
Yep.
Can't really think of that many fights where people have had great fights and then gone on to put on stinkers. Even when they've gotten older, we think, like Hua Nogueira, I guess is the classic one we've talked about a bunch, right? They're always pretty good.
Diaz Lawler too.
What's that?
Diaz Lawler too.
Yeah, I can't think of many fights where, like, unless someone found a way to just shut the other guy out.
Yeah.
That they went from being like really awesome and cool to being like super tepid and dull.
Yeah.
There aren't I couldn't think of any off the top of my head. If anyone can, that'd be great. So I think it will be. I'm gonna be optimistic. I think it's gonna be cool. No, I've done this before because I said that I thought that Nagano would be cool and it was terrible. I'm going to be optimistic. I think it's going to be like their other fights. I think it's going to be an awesome fight. I do fairly strongly favor Adesanya. He might even get a finish. So, setting myself up for either the stinkiest fight of all time or like an injury TKO.
Yeah, I think if he does what he did in their rematch, he does likely get a finish. I'm picking Pereira on the basis that Adesanya is going to think he's smart by avoiding the fight, and that just giving a puncher way too much time to find that punch. But usually my instinct is to go the other way. If you need one big shot or a few big moments to win, it's hard to count on that. Miguel, you picking Adesanya as well?
Yeah, I think I'm going to pick Adesanya because I actually don't think that Pereira is that great of a kick defender. Watching his Vaki Top fights, like that's what kind of has me worried. Like there were times in that fight where he was just kind of doing the Diaz thing where he's just squatting down after getting kicked in the legs because he doesn't know what else to do, And I think kind of the way I see the dynamic going is that Izzy's going to have a lot of success just jabbing, moving around, and low kicking, and maybe tying up close. But I think he's probably just going to try and stay away a lot, and he'll have a lot of success. If he can land kicks, that's a trait of stuff that can help him when he's very used to fighting 5-minute rounds, and Pereira is not at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that Pereira will probably work his way into the fight with some big moments. And I think that in those moments, I expect Adesanya to respond like with some real offense that we haven't seen from him in a little bit, and not just run away, because Pereira is there to be hit. Like his long guard can be worked around, and Adesanya really, when he starts chaining stuff together, when he starts getting you biting on feints, and he's got like that long lead uppercut that he can sneak underneath, like as you're trying to frame away, he can kick to the legs, the head, the body, mix it up. Mm-hmm. I think he'll find that Pereira is hittable, and when he's getting dinged by Pereira, he's going to feel like he's got to, he's got to throw a little bit like Gastelum or something like that, where, that's the last time we really saw him go and kind of put it to somebody. And I mean, Costa a little bit, but he kind of just picked Costa apart at range until he found the shot. Yeah. But like the last time he really like overwhelmed somebody, I feel like was Gastelum, and it feels like because Gastelum was dinging him a little bit. And I think that's why it's sort of like, Phil, I'm expecting a good fight. At least maybe I'm hopeful for it, and I think it probably will look cool regardless.
Sure. It's going to be tense and exciting, even if it's the stinkiest version of this matchup. Those big moments and that constant tightrope feeling is gonna keep it engaging, at least for a first watch, right? It can't
Imagine if it is the Cannonier fight.
Don't say that.
Or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Like, man.
Well,
yeah, I don't think it's possible. I mean,
I think it is, but
it is possible.
That's kind of why I'm picking Pereira, because I do think it's possible. We'll see. I dug my own grave months ago, and on the bright side, if I turn out to be right, I'll look like a special genius. And if not, I'll just have proven that I'm as dumb as everyone already thinks I am. So it's really a no-lose situation for me. It's great.
Yeah, starting from the bottom, like, it really does put you in a special position for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, especially if Pereira wins, then you can just be like, I'm going to take Robert Whittaker against him, and then everything is all good, right?
Yeah. I just hope it's the end of the Bobby Knuckles died for this era. Get Bobby Knuckles back in that title picture, all right? That's what I want. Okay, let's take a break then. We have spent a long time on that matchup, but I think it is by far the most deserving of that discussion. Again, weird, because it's Bananas like 6-1. He shouldn't be here. But the history between these guys makes this undeniably compelling and interesting. And if we assume it's going to be a lot of kickboxing, then, as Phil said, those were great fights. So I'm very much looking forward to it. Let's take a break then. When we come back, Carlos Esparza versus Zhang Weili, which Miguel has promised me he finds fascinating and has a lot of interesting things to say about. And then Dustin Poirier.
I'm glad someone's going to be leading the conversation on that one.
Yeah, good luck, Miguel. And then
best fight on the card.
Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Brad Riddell, Hinata Moicano, all of that after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are now on to the co-main event of UFC 281. Carla Esparza defending her belt against Zhang Weili. Miguel, take it away.
So yeah, we have to start by talking about Namajunas versus Esparza too, right? Because you
Do
guys
we?
made me watch it for the first time. I think like a lot of people, wasn't Canelo versus Bivol going on at the same
Yes.
time? So it's like,
Yes.
why would you choose? But I guess you guys probably had to go back and watch it, and I just never did. And then I heard it was terrible and just avoided it the whole time. But for this, I finally went back and watched it, and maybe
Famously,
I actually have a bit of a different view about the fight because I didn't watch it live, and so like I've let all the dust settle. There's no emotion. I didn't spend any money on like the terrible pay-per-view. And considering all that, I actually think this fight is hilarious.
it
It's
is
just one
funny.
of the funniest things I've ever seen, and I enjoyed watching it for that reason.
Have you met our mutual friend / enemy Zane Simon? I think you guys would get along.
Yeah. I don't know if I would watch it ever again, but for a first time viewing, sitting down, it was actually just funny. Like everything that the commentators say, everything leading up, it just is so much funnier when you know what's coming.
That's true. Yeah, famously, by the way, one of the judges was watching Canelo Bivol during the
Yeah,
fight.
that's right.
I respect that a lot.
So funny. Yeah.
Yeah, but about this fight specifically against Zhang Weili, I think it got a little bit more interesting because like I think obviously like when you think about it at first, you think this is a huge physical mismatch, and of course, Zhang Weili is just going to smash Esparza. Uh, Esparza is going to come in there. She's a sitting duck on the feet. She's going to get out muscled whenever she tries to wrestle. But then, like when you look into their fights a little bit more, you're like, well, I mean, Esparza actually is always a decent chain wrestler.
Yeah.
And she, you know, keeps a safe distance on the feet. And Zhang Weili is not necessarily like a pressure fighter. She just kind of hangs out at range. She relies a lot on kicks. Esparza can catch kicks and take her down. And, you know, obviously we saw the last couple rounds against Rose that Zhang Weili is like not this lightning fast get up off of her feet offensive guard, or you know, going to immediately look for underhooks or and start working her way back up. She really just got stuck on the bottom against Rose, of all people. And so you kind of see that there's definitely a way this fight could play out where, of course, all the physical advantages are for Zhang Weili, but she's like technically, I don't know if this was like a wrestler who could actually match her physically, I would have no problems picking not that they exist anymore at strawweight, but I would have no problems picking like a good strong wrestler over Zhang Weili. But I think it kind of comes down to like whether or not Zhang Weili is going to make good decisions, because even in that fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the last one, the most recent one, like she just got herself in bad positions from like going for weird body lock takedowns, like doing the normal women's MMA stuff where she's just trying to be a little too aggressive. She wants to throw strikes all the time. She wants to do something big and wants to get a big reversal, get a big throw, and she got put in some bad positions where if it was Esparza, she probably would have just ended up on her back. But against Joanna just used it as an opportunity to escape and to work her way back up. And so I think that creates some interesting opportunities. Like I'm not going to pick Esparza, but I think it could be a little bit more interesting of a fight.
I'm glad you say that, because I actually agree. Like I have been for quite a while the only Carla Esparza appreciator on the planet. Everyone hates her. I guess everyone watched The Ultimate Fighter and she was like mean.
What is that?
I don't watch The Ultimate Fighter because it sucks. So I just get to appreciate her fights, which are generally really fun. And I'm always pointing out, like, she is just far and away the best wrestler in this division. Best mat wrestler, best chain wrestler. A lot
by default, because Tatiana Suarez
course.
dropped off
Yeah,
the planet.
RP.
Yeah, and if Tatiana Suarez were still around, Miguel, I would agree with you. I would probably pick her over Zhang Weili pretty confidently.
For sure.
But it is something that, yeah, like by default, but also not just by default. Like even with Suarez around, she's still leagues above most of the other women in this division, if not all of them, except for Suarez as a wrestler. There's just a lot of fighters here who have 1 or 2 layers of takedown defense, or they stop a takedown, they end up on their knees in a headlock, and Esparza will just keep driving and keep attacking legs, keep chasing different angles, and will keep going in scrambles. So she's just has a lot of layers as a wrestler for these women to deal with. And I think the only reason I couldn't ever pick her to win off of that is that she is not a 5-round fighter.
Yep, exactly.
That Namajunas fight was literally the only time in history that Carla Esparza has looked the same in the 3rd round as she did in the 1st, and that's because nothing happened. Otherwise, she routinely gasses. And even if she does get takedowns and win good positions, unless she TKOs Zhang, which seems fairly unlikely, or submits her, which seems also unlikely, she's still going to have to contend with some scrambles. She's going to have to get through that takedown defense against a much bigger, stronger woman. She's going to be expending energy she can't afford to not have when we get to rounds 4 and 5. Because even if Zhang also gets tired from all that scrambling, she's going to retain some of her power and speed. And I think eventually it's just going to be like running into a wall, trying to take her down with a shot.
Yep.
So, Phil, you got anything to add to that?
So my main thing so if Pereira Adesanya, I'm maybe slightly against the grain picking an exciting fight. With Zhang Esparza, I'm going to pose a question.
Mm-hmm.
How good is Zhang Weili at being aggressive?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how good is she? Because Miguel said she's not really a pressure fighter, but like, how good is she closing down someone who just doesn't want to exchange with her at all? Because all of her most impressive performances have been against people who respond to aggression with more aggression, who kind of done things, who want to be winning the fight at all times.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Joanna Jędrzejczyk, particularly in the second fight, Jessica Andrade, they came forward, and if you come forward and fight Zhang Weili in that kind of fight, she is just an absolute physical monster.
Mm-hmm.
Carla Esparza fights her in any kind of head-on way, he's going to get absolutely obliterated.
Yeah.
I think the answer for Esparza, it has to be, she has to try and win the shittiest, ugliest fight in the world. Again, he has to try and win the fight just running away the whole time and not doing anything. Because, as you said, given lots of empty space given an aggressive fight, or given a fight where she can build a lead against aggressive opponents, Zhang is a tight, dangerous counterpuncher. She's so explosive and powerful that her sort of grappling, her tendency to make poor grappling decisions doesn't matter as long as she's fighting off her opponent rather than. But I think given empty space is when she starts to make more bad decisions.
Yeah,
and I think regardless of whether Esparza can make that happen, because as I said, the physical gulf is so enormous. Genuinely, the style matchup here, I'm thinking this is essentially Maynard Guida. Best approach for Esparza, because she's undersized, she's not going to be able to hit takedowns until late. As you said, she probably doesn't have the gas tank to hit takedowns late, although, you wouldn't have said that of Rose Namajunas either. It just goes to show that,
yeah.
And you take a certain element of Zhang Weili's physical explosiveness out of the equation, she's actually, quite a not the world's most flawless technical fighter in multiple areas.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Esparza absolutely has to make this fight absolutely suck. Can she do that? She did it last time.
Yeah, she had a lot of help.
She had a lot of help.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, Weili Zhang is not good at being aggressive, but she will be aggressive given time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she will go and throw because she's still confident in that she's super durable and hard to hurt and so on. I mean, perhaps less so than perhaps bit less confident in that after the Namajunas knockout.
Mm-hmm.
In that Jędrzejczyk fight is very impressive, but also like one which hinged on just like a few things. It was just was Zhang just being able to counter kicks with punches and takedowns, and Jędrzejczyk just not giving up on throwing raw low kicks.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a silly ass spinning back fist at the end that knocks Jędrzejczyk out. Yeah, none of it made me think like, oh yeah, she's solved her problems with tracking people down. You totally beat Namajunas in a rematch. I was like, in neutral space, she's the same person. I still don't know how she builds a stand-up approach other than the same way that Jędrzejczyk did. She just chases people down and throws raw low kicks at them.
Yeah.
So obviously I favor. You'd have to be an absolute lunatic not to. I'd say I did also just think this was going to be an utter slaughter when I looked at it on paper. I was just like, Esparza's going to try and clinch up, and then she's just going to get smashed into paste. Still could be a slaughter, but I think that the underpriced outcome in this fight is that it sucks complete ass. Shit.
We should be so lucky.
And then maybe it like sucks for 4 rounds, and then Esparza is exhausted, and like Zhang just throws her through the mat.
Yeah, and to reiterate, that is the thing, right? Like, Carla has to finish Zhang Weili in the first half of this fight. She has to.
She doesn't. If she can make the fight suck bad enough.
Okay, well, all right. But even then,
she's got to try and find that Namajunas 2 magic once again. I don't know though, because I don't think she can really. She doesn't have a way to just avoid exchanges outside of just shooting for takedowns. So once she starts getting tired, like she doesn't have the footwork to stay away. Even if Zhang Weili is not necessarily chasing her down, she's going to be throwing kicks. She's going to be throwing some stuff at Esparza. Esparza's going to feel like a sitting duck. She's going to start panicking a little bit. And she's going to probably shoot for takedowns because that's like her safety valve. That's how she tries to get out of those dangerous situations. And I think that's the problem is essentially Zhang Weili might turn her into a bit of a panic wrestler later on because that's just kind of who she is.
Yeah.
And I think it's not that Zhang Weili is necessarily, I mean, she could, but probably going to just like walk her down and start, beating her up like Joanna Jędrzejczyk did. But she's just going to start winning those wrestling exchanges because of her strength. And she's going to start, just getting on top, landing transitional offense and just kind of beating Esparza up.
Yeah, but she is also going to get taken down when she pressures.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
early, for sure.
That Jędrzejczyk fight, as long ago as it was, don't forget that 95% of that entire fight was Joanna just having to fight off takedown after takedown after takedown. So we'll see. I hope it's interesting. I actually kind of think it will be. I don't think Esparza has the. I agree with Miguel. Like, she's going to have to wrestle in response to Zhang Weili's pressure. Maybe it starts slow, but Zhang is going to figure out that she needs to be aggressive, even if it's not necessarily her strongest suit. She's going to step in. She's going to chase Esparza. And the more that dynamic plays out, the more Esparza is going to have to wrestle to answer that pressure. And that is going to the fight's going to heat up after that, I think, one way or another. But you have
I think it's going to be, my prediction is going to be a lot of Zhang trailing Esparza around the cage, throwing the sporadic low kicks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think she's probably going to, there's a real solid chance it will stink and Zhang will win every single round due to that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that's the underpriced option here. I think Esparza winning is it's more of a possibility than I thought it was, but I still wouldn't put it in. Still wouldn't say it's
realistic,
anything more than like a 1 in 5 chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the chances of it being stinky for a lot of the fight are pretty high, actually. Especially if Team Esparza do their homework. Like, I think that it's honestly, I think the actual correct thing to do. We were talking mentioning before, like, if you hear the boos, it's working. I think they have to try and make this fight suck.
Yeah.
It's one of those fights like Guida Maynard where that was the only way to try and win that fight.
Miguel, last thought before we move on from this very straightforward match.
I was just going to say, what makes me happy is thinking of Rose Namajunas watching this fight and just, does she want her old rival who beat her twice to win, or does she want the red wave from China to win?
That's going to be a tough one. Personal grievances or politics based on personal grievances?
Yeah.
Cosmic evil from the East.
Yes.
Yeah. Picture the movie 300. That's what Zhang Weili represents. Okay, let's move on then. That's more than enough for, again, a very straightforward matchup. Let's get on to, frankly, for a number of reasons, a harder matchup to call. Although, if both guys come in looking like themselves, I think there's still a relatively simple pick here. Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. Phil, I'll let you kick us into this one.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fight where I think the big X factor that you have to gamble it on is Dustin Poirier's durability and the fact that it's only 3 rounds.
Yeah.
Because if this were a 5-rounder and you trust Dustin Poirier not to get immediately knocked out, I think it would be easy to pick him. He is in a more stable 5-rounder over his career. I think he's been more stable in those kind of fights over his career. Simply has a style for being able to preserve a gas tank much more than Chandler does.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just more diverse. He works off the jab. He's got a better and more diverse countering game. A sneaky right hook. He can kind of shift and work off his own jab. He can low kick, although it's becoming increasingly similar to how Dan Henderson used to low kick. His hips have calcified. Yeah, lots of things that would work against Michael Chandler. And the main question, almost as always with Michael Chandler fights, is Michael Chandler going to knock him out immediately?
Mm-hmm.
And as always, the answer is maybe.
Maybe.
Because he comes pretty close to doing it to everyone.
Yep.
And then sometimes it works. And sometimes it doesn't. And that's all you can really say about Michael Chandler at this point.
Yeah.
Does Dustin Poirier have historically a very good chin? Yes. Has he been finished by by fast twitch explosive punchers who have just gotten him out of there almost instantaneously? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Conor McGregor, and you could argue that was kind of early in his career, but Michael Johnson fight was in Dustin Poirier's prime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. It's just is Michael Chandler going to immediately knock him out? And the answer is that's it.
And if he doesn't, it's pretty predictable that he, one way or another, is likely to collapse. Now, I would say the wrinkle to that is that he almost succeeded in having a second stage strategic adjustment against Justin Gaethje. Almost.
Mm-hmm.
He found new openings as that fight went on, particularly the body punches. And was really doing it, and then the fight kept being crazy, and then he sort of, I don't know, quit trying. He just decided to fuck around and posture and really just burned the last minute of a fight that was honestly still, I think, within his grasp to get one more big moment and possibly win it. So one way or another, whether it's he gasses and gets finished, or he makes possibly some good decisions but then stops making them, it's the Michael Chandler fight. The only one he has. Miguel, what do you say?
Yeah, I think the other question, in addition to that, is Poirier gonna jump the gilly? Because I, I really think that like even against Tony Ferguson when Chandler kind of got like this weird flash knockdown early where he was throwing a low kick and Tony's got really long arms and hits hard and he caught him. And then he was getting a little bit chewed up, and then he just shot, a super nice explosive double leg and just took him down and spent half the round just on top. And I think he can do that to Poirier. Like Poirier I just don't trust him to make good decisions defending takedowns. Like he can, but he just always like he's the guy that rolled out of the omoplata against Oliveira, right? And then ended up on his back and getting finished. And it's just
you saw like Islam talking about this beforehand, right? Sorry, afterwards.
What's that?
Someone was talking to him about him, and they were like, he was like, these people fighting Charles, they're not good grapplers. And they're like, Dustin Poirier, he's a black belt. He was like, good, but how he rolled out of this. Who give him this black belt? Give it to him.
Yeah. He doesn't, the thing with Poirier, I think, is he just doesn't have the patience in grappling situations. He just like loses his nerve, and like, like if he were content to lose a round, getting out grappled safely, he'd put himself in much better stead in those kinds of matchups to come back and make something happen. But he does not have the patience. He gets stuck in a position like he did against Charles, or he gets held up against the fence in a protracted shot attempt, and he wants something dynamic to happen. He wants chances. He's not a fighter who will consent to just kind of burn time off the clock when somebody is nominally out grappling him. And against really good grapplers and wrestlers, that leads to them then progressively out grappling him even more, because he can't just accept that, okay, maybe this isn't my round. We'll see what happens next time. Can Chandler do that for a full fight, even if Dustin jumps the gilly?
I don't think so. Like, I don't think that he will necessarily until he starts getting hit. Like, I don't think Chandler's just going to come in here and just try and shoot takedowns, because I think he's at this point in his career where it's like where his goals and things like that are not going to be met from just winning like boring top position decisions. Like he wants to get like big fights and get out and make money probably. I don't think he wants to just go and lay on top of Dustin Poirier and then try and do that to a few more other people and then maybe fight Islam or something like that,
Yeah.
Also, I think he probably knows that he just can't keep that up anymore.
Yeah.
He's still frighteningly quick and strong.
Oh yeah.
Considering how long he's been doing this. But I think he's never. I mean, his cardio back in the day was absolutely magical, because you were just like, you're fighting like a lunatic. How are you still going at this point?
Yeah. But
no, he hasn't got. He's gotten better at so many things over the course of his career. And we've praised like the level of preparation, specific preparation he has for every opponent.
Mm-hmm.
He comes in, but he's just never learned to preserve energy.
Yeah, he used to have classic wrestler grinder cardio, which is like, I'm going to get absolutely dead tired, but dealing with me is going to make you even more tired. Now that he's gotten old, that just isn't really an option anymore. But his style, as much as he's polished up some technical things, he's still not a great technical fighter. He can't like neutralize, and he never developed the style to neutralize an opponent. Like if the fight's going to be crazy, Michael Chandler is going to either make it crazy immediately, or he has no choice but to accept that it's going to be crazy. And I think we'd be remiss not to point out that Chandler himself is, if anything, maybe more fragile than Poirier at this point. Like his chin.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Poirier has been slept by guys like Chandler before quickly. But Chandler's been slept by big punchers. Chandler is the one who leaves way more openings coming forward, and does not react as calmly as Poirier has learned to do when he gets hurt. And for a long time, the real backbone of the Dustin Poirier game has been his counterpunching.
Yeah.
So with his body work, with his ability to catch Chandler overextending, with his ability to kind of, at least as a striker, sort of stay cool when shit is going bad and keep his defense going and look for his moments, you really just kind of have to pick Poirier, in my opinion. And the question is simply like, has he suddenly gotten old? He's a hot sauce businessman now. The Louisiana version of an oil man.
Does he have the motivation to, after getting choked out in 2 different title fights? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure with Poirier. I do trust his defense. Like, it has been slowly getting better. He really is like one of the better boxers in the UFC still. Like, even with his hits and stuff, if you see him hitting the bag, it's like, wow, that he hits the bag like a boxer does, And he's really creative in those exchanges. Like, he doesn't just throw 1 or 2 kinds of punches. He really mixes things up well, mixes up rhythm and timing. I think one of the thinking back to the Holloway fights, like one of the times he really stumbled Holloway. You remember the big shifting right hands, but he also just like threw 2 left hooks in a row that were or maybe they were right hooks, but he just varied up the rhythm and the timing and just caught Holloway and backed him off. He can do a lot of stuff off the back foot, what he did against Gaethje. And so I kind of trust him to really be able to avoid those big shots from Chandler. And Chandler's going to try to set it up. I don't think he's just going to, just try and blast in with a right hand. Like, he does that, and he can do that. But I think when it's not working, like we saw against Benson Henderson, I think Ryan Wagner posted a clip of it the other day, of just Chandler kind of working for almost I think a full minute to set up his right hand that kind of slumped. Just shifting in, kind of tapping with both hands, kind of pressuring a little bit. He'll try that stuff, but I just trust Poirier's guard and counterpunching to kind of allow him to avoid the worst of it and just really honestly punish Chandler a lot because, like we said, I don't think Chandler can really take the shots as well. Yeah,
I think that is the real area where Chandler has improved, is like in a best possible version of Tyron Woodley kind of way.
Yeah.
Is it still pretty much all looking for one big shot? Absolutely. But just finding ways to disguise when that big shot is coming, to create other threats, to play off of it a little bit, his feints, his sort of methodical pressure, these are the real things that he's improved. But yeah, Poirier is just, I think, too good of a boxer to, as long as he doesn't just get out wrestled, then you got to count on his counterpunching to pull him through. Okay. Anything else, Phil?
I think I'm going to pick Chandler.
Oh, yeah?
Just because I don't think he's like a better fighter or anything. I just feel like maybe, again, it's one of these things where he's just a little bit underpriced. Like for a few things, apart from those that we've already mentioned, like, he had the huge war with Gaethje, and yeah, in some ways, kind of screwed himself over. But I think because he was posturing because he was super gassed.
Yeah.
I think Poirier is a bit less durable than Gaethje. Gaethje has actually like at least doesn't have great cagecraft, but he has been taught by Trevor Whitman to have an understanding of cagecraft, and Dustin Poirier hasn't.
Right.
He has no understanding of cagecraft whatsoever, and we saw what Chandler could do with that against Hooker.
Yeah.
Who, again, was like a pretty bad matchup for Chandler in a lot of ways on paper. Infinitely durable, just jab and low kick, all the things that Chandler sucks against. And Chandler was like, no, this guy just gives away when pressured, and he just, forced him into a big exchange and walloped him. The grappling, as you said, like combined with the cagecraft, I think Poirier panics more when he's backed up against the fence and puts himself there all the time. And he's not a low kicker like Gaethje. He doesn't. He's not going to be constantly kicking away at Chandler's legs. And we've said many times in the past that Chandler is just not. he's gotten visibly injured, like against Primus, and B, he just has no low kick defense really, apart from big punch. But yeah, obviously, I think Poirier is a better, cooler fighter. I like him more. And 3 rounds. If it was 5 rounds, I would. In this, I'm like, if I see Chandler running Poirier backwards right at the start like he did Hooker, is he just gonna either clatter him or just pick up like the first round?
Mm-hmm.
And he pick up another round with just like a takedown into Poirier doing something stupid? Yes, he can.
Yeah,
close enough margins for Chandler to win. Yeah.
Yeah, and also just like, where is Poirier mentally? Like you guys said, he lost 2 title fights, and he just Poirier sounds like he is in, no, I'm just in it for the paycheck kind of territory at this point, right? He's just like, I just want big fights. I'm going to be retiring soon. Whereas Chandler sounds about as insanely confident as he ever was.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think Poirier's the better fighter, all things said and done. But there's just a confluence of factors here which makes me worried for Poirier in a way which I wasn't worried for Gaethje.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable case. The cagecraft in particular, I would just say I'm still going to pick Poirier because defensively, Dan Hooker, he is not. Better, much better defensively. We've seen in this fight with his rematches with McGregor, like he can wait out some scary moments against a fast-handed, dangerous puncher with maybe less explosiveness but more reach than Chandler has. He can, stay safe even in bad positions and just find counter punches. These are things that Dan Hooker does not have to the same extent. So I got to pick Poirier, but I think you make a good case. And, yeah, I think it would be foolish to just assume that Poirier is going to have an easy fight here. Chandler is not an easy guy to fight.
So, weirdly enough, I was just thinking about this. Poirier's, at one point, Poirier was coming up at the same time pretty much as Will Brooks. In terms of how they fight off clinches and work their grappling game and so on. They're actually like fairly similar fighters. Just Poirier is obviously far more dynamic and so on.
And he vampirically sucked out the last of Will Brooks's youth in their training sessions. Yeah.
Will Brooks was always like a puzzlingly difficult matchup for Michael Chandler.
Yeah.
So yeah, it might just be that whatever that mix of clinch and stand-up skills that meant that Chandler just couldn't find a safe zone against Brooks. It might just mean that Poirier just wrecks him. I'm still going to take Chandler just because I'm feel myself a bit concerned about the old Chandler coin flip this time. I feel like the one side of it's been weighted a bit more heavily than it was against Chucky Olives or Gaethje.
The one thing that I definitely think will be the case is I think this fight will actually be awesome, like a 3-round war, and not necessarily for any technical reason other than because it could just be like kind of weird or it could just end instantly. But because we have like these 4 sort of like lightweight kings of violence with Poirier and Chandler and Gaethje and Oliveira, and this is like the last fight that like finishes all the matchups between them, and all the other fights between all the other fighters have just been absolute bangers. I just feel like this one has to be right, or maybe it has to not be just because MMA can never like do what it's supposed to do.
It absolutely should be.
I can't imagine it being boring, he says, with 100% confidence and totally sure that he's not jinxing it.
No, I don't think it'll be boring, which is why I am right now confidently predicting freak injury.
Yeah.
The way things have been going lately, we're looking at a freak injury. Get into an
exchange, and Chandler's ankle breaks again, and simultaneously Poirier's hip goes like spinning off into the audience somehow.
His pelvis just flies out of his trunks. Yep. But no, barring that, there's no way it's bad. There simply isn't. Injury is the only way this isn't bad. I'm confident of that. The only way this is bad, rather. Okay. Well, that is more than enough time on these two fights, which means when we come back for segment 3, we're going to have to more or less speed through, to the best of our ability, Brad Riddell versus Renato Moicano. We'll be back with that right after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. As promised, Brad Riddell, Renato Moicano. Miguel, what do you say about this? Where is Brad Riddell right now? And if he loses, does it emotionally crush Israel Adesanya, or does it inspire him to seek vicarious vengeance?
Yeah, I kind of have that question about both of these guys, really, because I think if the best versions of both of them show up, we get like some sort of a really awesome technical fight between two guys who can both get cracked, but can both like really put together some gorgeous offense.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll probably get mix it up as well too. Like I'm expecting some takedowns and some things of that sort, especially as Renato Moicano has kind of leaned into that a little bit more as he's recognized his frailty a little bit standing up. But primarily, I'm expecting Riddell to come in looking rejuvenated, and what I am thinking is a style matchup on the feet that probably favors him a good amount, because mostly I'm thinking back to Drew Dober, and not because like Drew Dober and Renato Moicano are similar at all, but just because of what Brad Riddell was able to do to Drew Dober. Like Drew Dober came, tried to pressure him, and tried to land a lot of straight shots, and then try to get him dipping into hooks. And what we saw with Brad Riddell is just lots of really good slip and counter combinations that I think are just like kryptonite for Renato Moicano. Like if Riddell starts slipping his longer straight punches and cracking him, I think that's probably not going to last very long. And I think that the type of wrestler that Renato Moicano is, I think Riddell being like, just a brick shithouse is probably going to help him kind of deal with kind of the clinch takedown game of Renato Moicano. But yeah, the most thing is like it could look a little crazy because I think both these guys can get hurt, but I think Brad Riddell's his defense, mostly like in his ability to slip shots, is really going to cause Renato Moicano some real problems.
Yeah, I think this is one where if Renato Moicano is patient, he really could win it. Because Brad Riddell is not good on the front foot. He simply isn't.
Yep.
He's really awkward. He's a front foot heavy counterpuncher who relies on that having that space in his stance, to that pocket behind his head to move back into, or just being, as you said, like a squat little brick shit house and ducking under things and slipping things. He, coming forward, is already too heavily weighted in his front foot. He tends to kind of stumble and overextend. He's essentially starting, his neutral position is already sort of overextended. And I just don't think he's comfortable with it. He's a counterpuncher. He's like one of the purest counterpunchers in the sport, I think.
Yep, for sure.
And so I think if Moicano Brad Riddell, backs up and stays in neutral space, and Moicano really looks to like work jabs and hopefully not get like Korean zombied on one of those jabs, and looks to score low kicks and try to draw Riddell forward and maybe find his takedowns off of that, sort of like how he did against Calvin Kattar. We are looking at a quite a close fight. If Moicano tries to put it on Riddell, he's going to have big moments early and then get cooked, because that tends to happen both to Moicano and to most of Riddell's opponents who aren't just exceptional strikers themselves. Phil, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, don't really like Renato Moicano as a lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
I might have said it before, but he's someone who so much of his game is built around being tall and just being like bigger than his opponent, and he can pick them off with jabs and low kicks from the outside, and then they close in, and he's either going to run away or he can like hit a takedown, or counterpunch to some extent. Yeah, like Miguel said, I think against were Moicano the same size at featherweight that he was. The same size at lightweight that he was at featherweight. If he was like a Jalen Turner type frame for this division, I would give him like a good chance to beat Brad Riddell. But as it stands, like he's not going to be that much taller than him, and yeah, I think it's just too much of a risk that he needs. His defense is not good. He needs that jab out there in front of him to keep people off him. Riddell is not easy to low kick. He's good at countering kicks as well as punches, even if he is front foot heavy. But yeah, and we've seen like Moicano be pulverized by jab counters like more than once. I just don't think he's made for this division. I think like Riddell being a counterpuncher and being sort of a short tank of a man has worked against him quite a lot. I think this is one of those fights where it's just I think this is much more built for his style. Because he's going to get a lot of jabs to counter.
Yep, jab counter is going to decide it, in my opinion. That's why I'm going to pick Riddell. Because even if Moicano fights a good sort of rangier fight, tries to ply his kicks. Again, we saw what happened when he
eventually he'll just get put back in the cage, even if he doesn't get immediately countered a la Fiziev or Zombie. He'll get put in the cage, and then Riddell will chew him up.
Yeah,
he did Doba.
So okay, I think that's about it. I mean, a pretty straightforward fight. I hope it's fun. I think it has a good chance of being fun, but really, it's a sort of a where are you at this current moment kind of matchup. Because if Riddell is, the man has been in a shitload of crazy fights at this point, and has in the past shown what looks to me like a little shaky confidence against some of these matchups. Likewise, Moicano, it's difficult to know. Like, the man's been on a huge run at one point of terrible losses. Seems rejuvenated, at least in terms of confidence, but has never been a really great, deep technical boxer. And those defensive lapses, I think, are the kind of thing that Riddell, at his best, or even slightly worse than his best, kind of feasts on. Miguel, anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, other than it kind of sucks for Renato Moicano because he's like one of these fighters that, like, he's really cool, right? And he had a lot of potential, and watching him beat Calvin Kattar, like, even in retrospect, like, that win, of course, like, that's always a strategy and a style that could win against Kattar, but it just still, like, is an awesome win, and, like, he had so much potential, and just kind of how he's got matched up and how his career has gone, moving to lightweight, all that stuff. He's like, it just kind of feels sad, and then, like, taking that RDA fight on, like, 4 days' notice, which is like probably a winnable matchup for him in some sense, but also a difficult one if he had a full camp still. And then now going right into fighting Brad Riddell. I just feel a little bit bad in a sense for both of these guys because they've both just been like super talented guys. Like the lightweight division is a shark tank, and they're both interesting guys that you want to see around, but just don't really have the time or the circumstances. Like maybe if it was like they had careers managed in the way that like a boxing career was, they could have like, really become something kind of cool at the top of this division, but doesn't seem like it's going to work for either of them. But this fight will probably be awesome, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, that'll do it for our main show coverage of UFC 281. I will mention again that Phil and I are immediately after this going to be talking about some more of these undercard fights. But until then, oh, by the way, that's on the Heavy Hands Patreon. It's $3. Go do that. Until then, I want to thank Miguel Class for joining us. Truly a pleasure. One of the nice ones.
Yeah, it's been fun.
And you should find him on Twitter at MigClass, MIGCLASS. And definitely check out his stuff on the fight site. And once again, could you give us the address to support Tumen's efforts to emigrate?
Yeah, it's on Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/IggyTFS.
All right. And otherwise, find Phil and I on Twitter at BoxingBush, at EvilGregJackson. And we'll be back next week for UFC 281 recap, for which we are going to have fan favorite and my personal enemy, Kyle McLaughlin, the godfather, the granddaddy of the fight side, who has long since disowned his reprobate children.
We're all just trying to make him proud.
And you never will. You know, he's a devil, that Kyle McLaughlin. So he'll be back with us on the show to talk about UFC 281 after the fact next week. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
Yeah, we should have mentioned something about the glue factory, because I was going to say that.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That one of the things that I think is like makes that whole. I'm like a little bit on the side of Phil, just because like the way that they do their rankings is so terrible that you have like Tony and Connor hanging out in the top 15. It's like the only way to like deal with this is to just kill these guys with like unranked people like Patty Pimblett or whatever to just like flush them out and get them the hell out of here. If they like treated rankings a little bit better, like so with Frankie Edgar, it's like he's had one relevant win at bantamweight and looked kind of terrible a little bit outside of that. One questionable win really, but it was a good win. But still really questionable, and then kind of just got killed in two other fights. It's like, why is he ranked in the top 15? Why do we need, there are lots of, like, would you think that, like, Frankie Edgar would be able to beat, like, I don't know, Hani Barcelos or something like that?
Uh-huh.
It's like, I don't know.
Well,
maybe.
You heard it here, folks. Miguel Class, quote, kill old people.
Yes, slowly everyone is coming round to my Logan's Run matchmaking.